to have Lisa Davison with us today to guide your class and to also guide us through worship. She is the second of 5 Phillips Theological Seminarians. Maybe that's not a word I use for you all.
No.
That's not the best word.
PTS people.
PTS people. And so we're honored to have her today. She has been with us, that I'm aware of, at least 2 or 3 previous times. And so you're in for a treat if you have not been a part of one of her previous presentations. So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you.
To you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. All right. Well, Katie, do you want to?
Yes, so a few weeks ago, Carol read her poem to us about Oklahoma City, and several people asked if they could actually read it, and so she sent a copy because she's on my care team, and so that's our connection. Can you hear me, Carol?
I can hear you.
Good. Anyway, so the thing about this Sunday school class is we are blessed with so many talents, and Carol has a beautiful talent in being able to express strong emotions in beautiful poetry. And so I wanted to be sure and pass these out to you. And Carol, would you like to read it to us one more time? So, because I think when you read it and you hear it, it's a lot more powerful. So let me just pass it around this way, down this way. Did you say yes or no? Yes?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, let's all get a copy here.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good to see you. You look a little smaller on my screen, so it kind of reminds me of certain paintings. Anyway, this poem was written the day after the Oklahoma City bombing, because the day before the bombing had happened. And so a creative friend of mine, a concert pianist, called me, and he started playing music, and of course I started writing and sketching, and it was the next morning that after I came back from breakfast that I just sat down and wrote this whole thing. And oftentimes people talk about being a vessel, that you really don't, that you're just a vessel through which something comes. So that's the way this really happened. And it's called the 20th of April, 1995, New York City. There is a hush on the streets of New York City today. Someone looks of dismay about the bombing in Oklahoma City yesterday. No one can believe what went down. There is a hush on the streets of New York City today, much as there was a hush on the campus of Oklahoma State University on November 22nd, 1963, as I walked back to the dorm from my dismissed French class, eyes downturned, noticing people walking, but not talking about the shooting of JFK. People just walking to where they were going, as New Yorkers are today, just walking to where they are going, as if all minds keep going in silent mourning for the people of Oklahoma City. It's a pretty spring day, beautiful really, and normally New Yorkers in the streets would be abuzz, rustling in the delightfulness of spring. But today, it is so hard to look at the faces of young children, brilliant eyes, and know that young children died senselessly, and that their parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles will never kiss their sweet lips again. Lips of laughter, lips of life, gone in an instant, in moments of planned ignorance. The wind gently blows my hair. So many days the wind blew my hair there in Oklahoma as I grew up. The wind is a friend of nature to nurture me on the day of sorrow. And the blossoms are there and the fresh air and the songs of birds. Yes, only the birds chatter today, for they know not what happened. For them it is spring, and they are singing. They are singing amid the silence of the nation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, thank you so much for sharing. And thank you for giving us a copy of it too. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
That's a beautiful way to begin and a really hard way to follow. So, thank you, Carol, for that beautiful poem. I appreciate it. I was trying to remember in 1995, I lived in Canton, Missouri, northeast corner of Missouri, and I was the chaplain of a small college there called Culver-Stockton College. I had not yet made my connection with Oklahoma at that point, but it is accurate that everyone was stunned and in silence. So today, I couldn't remember what I had covered the first time I came here. I know what I did the last time I was here, so if I'm repeating, I apologize. Yesterday was our graduation for Phillips Theological Seminary. It's been a busy week. Tuesday was our awards day. Friday was trustee meeting, then graduate dinner, then graduation yesterday. And everything went really well, which is a big relief for me because my office has a good deal of responsibility for those activities. We graduated 21 students. And yeah, thank you. And since our incoming classes have grown, 60 last year, we're probably going to be 45 or 50 this year. I imagine our graduations will get bigger and they'll probably take a lot longer. And so that means our speakers will have to be shortening what they say. But at this point, they could still talk at will. On June 8th, I will be teaching my Women in the Hebrew Bible class for both our Doctor of Ministry students and master's level students in one class. It is my favorite class to teach. I think I've talked about women here before. It is my signature class, many students will tell you. And a couple of them were like, well, what are you going to do now that we have a new Hebrew Bible professor? Will you be teaching this again? And I assured them that as much as I respect and am happy to have Dr. Chuka join us in the fall, I don't think I'll give this one up. It's mine. But I thought today might be a good time, again, I don't think I've talked to you about Eve and Lilith. Have I talked to you about that? All right. Well, we're going to get started, and this is actually part of the opening day of class, so you get to be my students for a day. So we're going to get started with the question, where are the women in the Bible? The first activity I have students do, we won't have time to do today, is I divide them into groups and I have them take a certain portion of the Hebrew Bible and go through it and find all the women. And I remind them, they're not going to find many names, but there will be women. And when they are finished, we have sticky sheets of paper and they are loaded with female characters in the Hebrew Bible that nobody really knew were there because we read over them, especially when they're part of a group. So when we look for the women in the Hebrew Bible, there are some things we have to overcome. In the entire Bible, Hebrew Bible and New Testament, 3,100 proper names occur. Only 170 of those are women's names. So one thing that tells us is that when we find a woman's name, there must be something particularly important about that female character. The majority of the female names actually appear in the Hebrew Bible. As much as we love Jesus, we basically are facing a bunch of men disciples. The women are there, but we aren't always looking for them. So, but in the Hebrew Bible, there are a lot of those women's names appear. According to one person, using an English translation, which may not always give you a totally accurate reading, only 93 women speak in the Bible, a total of 14,000 words. That is only 1.1% of all the words in the Bible. So you can see, finding their names is one treasure. Finding a woman who actually is given voice is a totally different and wonderful experience. And then I remind students about how some of our church fathers referred to women as they were writing in their day. Tertullian, who was around 160 to 220 CE, wrote this: "Woman is a temple built over a sewer, the gateway to the devil. Woman, you are the devil's doorway. You should always go in mourning and in rags."
DK?
I beg your pardon.
What would you say to that?
I can't say it out loud.
Okay.
Yeah, really. And it has something to do with that sewer he's talking
Yeah,
about,
well,
right?
I was thinking, the sewer figured largely in my thoughts.
Yes. St. Thomas Aquinas. So many people love St. Thomas Aquinas. 13th century CE, as regards the individual nature, woman is defective and misbegotten. For the active force in the male seed tends to the production of a perfect likeness in the masculine sex, while the production of woman comes from a defect in the active force and from some material indisposition or even from some external influence.
I think I studied these people.
I know, they were the classics. Everybody reads them.
Well, I have not read that Tortolas thing before.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how reproduction happened,
I know.
if they felt that way against women.
Well,
You're gonna find out.
yeah, my guess is they were a necessary evil to fulfill needs of men.
The reason for the fall, you know?
Oh, we're going there today, so hold that thought. Martin Luther. If they, women, become tired or even die, that does not matter. Let them die in childbirth. That's why they are there. So I've already failed miserably as a woman because I gave birth to no children.
Luther hated the Jews too, so he
Did. He was really awful. I didn't even pick on my favorite, I say that sarcastically, Augustine, who said women were malformed men as well. So given all these attitudes, given that most of the biblical scholars throughout the centuries were men, mostly European men, it's really quite astounding that I'm even here today as a dean and a scholar of the Hebrew Bible. But that doesn't mean we can't correct all that has come before us. And that's one of the reasons why I teach this class, is because I want our students to know that the women are there and to talk about them. The other thing I forgot to say is, and I didn't do this to you this morning, I give them a quiz, closed Bible quiz. And I describe women characters and ask them to identify them. A lot of, well, I don't know her name, but I know her husband's name or her son's name. And so we go through that just again to let them know that those women have been there, you've just overlooked them. I'm proud to say though, I think women, those who are now taking my class in Women in the Hebrew Bible, after having taken Intro to Hebrew Bible with me, know more women's names than they did when I first got to Phillips. So that's a small victory. So we begin with the first women or woman, some have disagreements on this, in the Hebrew Bible. Oh, I forgot, I didn't let go of some of my slides, sorry about that. Here we go. This is Tertullian again. Do you not know that you are Eve, the judgment of God upon the sex lives on in this age, therefore. Necessarily the guilt should live on also. You are the gateway of the devil, the one who unseals the curse of that tree, and you are the first one to turn your back on divine law. You are the one who persuaded him whom the devil was not capable of corrupting. You easily destroyed the image of God, Adam. And because of what you deserve, that is death, even the Son of God had to die. Okay, women, we're also responsible for that, the crucifixion. And then here's my buddy, St. Augustine, in the 4th to 5th century. What is the difference whether it is in a wife or mother? It is still Eve, the temptress that we must beware of in any woman. I fail to see what use woman can be to man if one excludes the function of bearing children. So there you go, that's why they reproduce. Don't you love these people? Now you're gonna go back and read them again and think, how did I mean, we idolize our church fathers, and yet we don't look at all that they had to say. So we're gonna start today with Eve, and sometimes I tell folks I'm trying to redeem Eve myself. And we're gonna look at who Eve is and what really happens in that story. But first, a little bit of contemporary imagery that gives us some of our ideas about Genesis 3 and what is or isn't there. You may remember Desperate Housewives. Notice they were all in apples and seductive. I bet you did. Now this is an interesting piece, and you probably can't see. Let me see. Is that this one? Yeah. See if I can. I was trying to get the bottom off. But this is a modern, contemporary icon that someone gave to me that I respect, who I consider to be a feminist. And she just thought it was the most powerful, beautiful picture she could have. So, if you don't know what's going on here, this is Eve. Oh, I'm sorry, now I hit the wrong button. This is Eve. She's often portrayed with red hair, got the apple in her hand. Notice how downcast she is. Notice the serpent wrapped around her leg. And now, who is this?
Mary.
Mary, the mother of Jesus, the virgin, with her blue wrapped around her head, her pregnant belly, and here you have her kind of like forgiving Eve and telling her she's okay. Now, even though it has an apple, these are pears all around. And then Mary has her head on her foot on the head of the serpent. And there's that text at the end of Genesis 3 that says to the woman, enmity will be between you and the serpent, and you shall, it shall bite you at the heel, and you shall bash it at the head. And this is also reminding us that throughout tradition, the serpent has been equated with Satan. But that's not what the text says at all. So even the most innocent pictures still have a lot that we need to be aware of. So let's talk about Eve. The interesting thing is that we don't get the name Eve until Genesis 3. The first woman or the first male and female in Genesis 1 are never named. In the second story, even though we say Adam, the word Adam is actually a pun on Adamah, like human from the humus. And so it's not till the very end of the story that we actually get Eve. Her name in Hebrew is Hava, which means mother of all living. Now that doesn't sound so negative, like the sewer or the gateway to the devil. But up until that chapter, she is just known as woman. I've already talked about Adam. But guess what we do? We read her back into the story. And then we conflate those two creation stories. So Eve is in Genesis 1 as well as in Genesis 2, 4b and following. And then she finally shows up in the garden. Artwork throughout the centuries, and I'm sorry this is harder to see on a small screen, but we often have Eve again. The serpent is over the apple in her hand. The leaf is strategically placed, and it looks like there's a little card telling you what kind of plant that is. I don't know what it says. So, Genesis chapter 3, verse 6. So remember, the serpent says to the woman, did God really say you shouldn't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? And woman replies, yes, God said we shouldn't eat of it or even touch it. Which some people say, oh, she's already lying. But in my mind, I think you tell yourself you don't see it, you don't touch it, you won't eat it. Like when I have a plate of brownies, if I can see and smell them, I will eat them. And so the serpent says to her, oh, and Eve says, in the day that we eat of it, we shall surely die. And the serpent says, you won't die. You'll become like God, knowing good and evil. So in verse 6, the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise. She took of its fruit and ate. So notice right off, she thought about it. She didn't just take the fruit. She's making a conscious choice. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Now guess what? Many translations leave out who was with her. Why do you think they do that? I don't know about you, but I always assumed, Adam was off doing something else while she's doing this conversation with the serpent, takes the fruit, and then, she makes an apple pie, and he comes back and she gives him a slice, and he doesn't know where it came from, so he eats of it. But that's inaccurate. He was there the entire time the conversation was happening. He also had heard the restriction of not eating from it, and so she gave it to him and he ate. He didn't even think about it. He just ate. Now, tell me where she's tempting him. Because that's how we know Eve. She tempted Adam, right? There's even a song about it. One song at least. They say Eve tempted Adam with an apple, but I'm not going for that. I think it was her pink Cadillac. It's right there in the music. No temptation, none of that. He was there, he knew where the fruit came from, and he ate of it of his own volition. Now think, how many centuries, millennia, women have been made to feel like they are the gateway to the devil because, as we heard, she's the one that destroyed the image of God in Adam because Adam couldn't be tempted by the serpents. I can tell you, growing up, and this is actually in my book on women in the child-free women in the Hebrew Bible. Growing up, when I started my menstrual cycle, it was called the curse. Going back to our misreading and misinterpreting this story, which was really not about assigning blame, but about explaining why life is as hard as it is. There's another picture, sometimes named as Eve. Vain, see the little mirror and her red hair. And remember, with Mary, who is the virgin, you see the evidence of the whore-virgin dichotomy for women. It's what women were taught. You can either be a whore like Eve, or you could be a virgin like Mary.
Is that Rossetti's painting?
Yes, it is. Thank you. I have the footnotes here, but I was afraid they'd be too small to put on the screen. So, she eats from the tree, he eats from the tree. They try to, well, notice what happens. They don't die. Very key point, they don't die. And people say, oh, it was a metaphorical death. That's not what the Hebrew says. The Hebrew says, the day you eat of it, you shall surely drop dead. It's an emphatic Hebrew verb form. But their eyes are opened, and they do know good and evil, and they are finally ashamed because they see that they're different, and they try to cover themselves up with scratchy leaves. And then the holy comes walking in the breezy part of the evening, calls out to the man and says, hey, where are you? Of course, I'm always going like, you're God. You've only made 2 people so far. Shouldn't you be able to keep up with 2 of them? And, finally the man says, we hid ourselves because we were naked and afraid. And they go through, who told you this? And the man says, the woman whom you gave me tempted me, and I ate. And then the woman says, the serpent, in parentheses, who God made, beguiled me, and I ate. And then the poor serpent has nobody left to blame. I feel sorry for it. And so, again, I don't think the problem is they ate from the tree. I think the problem is they won't take responsibility for their actions. And this is going to play out throughout the Hebrew Bible, and we see it today. It wasn't me. One of my least favorite phrases, the devil made me do it. Oh, that's passing the buck pretty good right there. So God says, to the serpent, you'll crawl on your belly. To the woman, you'll bear children in pain, but you'll still sleep with your husband, do that thing that gets you pregnant. And to the man, the Holy says, you're going to have to work your stuff off to get this terrible land to grow food. It'll be hard. And then they are sent from the garden. But before that, the man names the woman Eve because she was the mother of all living. And again, they get sent from the garden and are protected from going back in. And a lot of people think that that's to protect them from eating again from the tree of knowledge, or that this is a punishment, that they're going to die. They weren't going to die before. But if you read the story, the tree of life was right there with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So they could have eaten from that tree and lived forever. But they chose knowledge. In essence, they chose to have a conscience. And that's how they become more mature partners with the holy in creation and beyond. So I've come to think of Eve as the liberator of humanity. And I get some of this from Harold Kushner's book. He talks about what would happen if we had stayed in the garden, about how nobody died, but we never know joy, we never know sorrow, we never know this, we never know that. We weren't meant to stay in the garden. We were meant to get out and to be partners with the holy in bringing the world into a vision of wholeness.
So that's like what they used to call the doctrine of the fortunate fall?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I still don't like the fall language at all because there's no fall at all in the text. And notice the word sin never appears in this story. It appears first when Cain kills Abel. And that is when God says sin crouches at the door, but you can have mastery over it. So there's no original sin, there's no fall, and I just now noticed, I forgot, that's a hummingbird, which I love hummingbirds. My mother loved hummingbirds. When I see them, I often think about my mom. But Eve, liberator of humanity. So I'm gonna pause and see if you have questions, thoughts, or comments. Yes?
Something that is a distraction, but the community from which the Old Testament chapters came from believed in talking animals.
At some point they did, yes.
And it suggests a interaction with nature that is completely alien to everyone in my family. But it is, something, distraction to the same, but it keeps striking me anyway.
Yeah, and in some interpretations, when God finishes and the animals talk to humans and the woman and the man are equal and everything seems to be good, but when they don't own up and pass the buck, we start to see shifting in relationships.
Yeah.
And so the man names the woman, which is a power act. But yeah, it's really amazing that in that first chapter, or in that first verse, when the serpent is talking, the ancient audience wouldn't have thought there was anything wrong with that.
Yeah, and there's, other talking animals.
Yeah, the Balaam's donkey was a good one. Good. Yes, ma'am.
So did we get to the tempting and the concepts through poor translation, or how did we?
Interestingly enough, in a strong avenue of Jewish interpretation, there is no fall, there is no original sin, women aren't blamed. Paul starts us in some ways to get there, or at least a New Testament writing or two. But to be honest, those church fathers, I think, are the ones. And often when you're trying to make a group of people to blame or less powerful, it's because you see them as a threat. And we know Augustine seemed to not like women at all. And so if you're trying to degrade them, it's because you think they're a threat to you. So what do? You blame them for the whole fall of humanity. And the crucifixion of Jesus, all heaped on a woman's head, so you keep your place. And you should always feel guilty because you're the reason Jesus died.
Because it's all your fault.
It's all our fault. And I actually have had plenty of people throughout my time of teaching and serving in the church treat me as if it was all my fault. And it's actually one of the arguments against women's ordination was that they are Eve and not fully in the image of God. Only the man was fully in the image of God.
And women shouldn't be teaching men.
No, women shouldn't teach men. Women shouldn't preach, lead worship, be on the chancel, vote. And I grew up thinking all that was behind me. And now I'm so scared because I see it all crumbling. And anything's possible right now.
Yes, and even in offshoots of our own denomination, Presbyterians. My husband attended an Orthodox Presbyterian church when we were still living in Texas, and they very much believed that women had no place in the leadership of the church.
I saw another hand, yes.
I did not go there.
tutored a little Afghan girl, and a week ago, the older one, 4th grader, was so excited. There was a school party. She had her hair down, first time I'd ever seen her hair without her cover, and new shoes, new dress. And the week, this last Thursday when I was over there, I was excited to see how she and her brother enjoyed the party. And I said, well, how was the party? And she said, I can't talk about it, in tears. I said, what happened? She said, Daddy wouldn't let me go.
Oh.
My heart just, I can't tell you what I felt for her. I could see the pain. Of course, all I could think about was, you're in America, assimilate, and do what Americans do, but she couldn't talk about it. She just said, Daddy wouldn't let me go. And she was all dressed up and had her hair done when I saw her. Then when I left, she was supposed to go to this party at school.
Yeah, and unfortunately, not all Americans will let women do what they want to do. There are plenty of religious groups within this country, as you just mentioned, Presbyterians, my own tradition, the Church of Christ, non-instrumental, do not allow women to even be on the chancel. And there's a dress code that you have to abide by, no pants, all of that kind of thing. It's really, I will brag just a moment, because one of the graduation student speakers yesterday talked about an ad, and I don't remember who or what the product was, but this company had done this test where they brought kids together and they asked them to do things like throw like a girl, run like a girl. And of course, everybody started, barely tossing the ball. Everybody was running funny, and so even the girls, it was boys and girls. And it was intended for good, because what ended up happening is they showed a young girl who, said, I do run like a girl and I'm good at it, kind of stuff. And so the tagline was blank like a girl, and it became a positive instead of a negative. And so the student brought that out yesterday and said, maybe we should do everything like a girl in a positive sense. And then she named some women in the Hebrew Bible. So I was sitting there going, yep, she got it. I think she got it. So. All right, yes.
I'm really struck by mankind's indifference to the woman we're all descended from, which is Noah's wife.
Thank you.
And boy, there's just a dramatic and difference between people's reaction to Eve and blowing off, having no idea who Noah's wife was, and everyone's descended from Noah's wife.
Yeah, they don't give, I studied a book with my women's group in Texas, and the book was called Forgotten Women of the Bible.
Yeah.
And the one I remembered best was Noah's wife, who never had a name. We called her Mrs. Noah. And, well, she didn't have a name. And for 40 years, she had her husband out there in the yard building this big old honking boat, and the neighbors came by, and they must have laughed, and he was the worst evangelist ever because he never made a convert. And they had all these animals getting on the boat, and I thought, she was the forgotten wife. She was a forgotten woman of the Bible. Who ever thinks about Mrs. Noah? Nobody. And as you say, we all descended from Mrs. Noah. Well, and the son.
Yeah, someone says that, yes.
There is a Jewish rabbi who writes children's books, Sandy Sasso. And she has one book called But God Remembered. And I use it as the opening to my class. But Noah's wife, she also has a book about her, and she names her.
Oh, really?
Na'amah, Naamah. And it's Midrash, obviously. It's, kind of imagining what the text doesn't tell us. But she makes certain that there's a name there for that woman. So, and the story she tells about Naamah is that while he was gathering up all the animals, she was gathering up seeds and plants to vegetate the earth. All right, now let's move to another character that actually is not in the Hebrew Bible, but gets put into the Hebrew Bible. Her name is Lilith, and Lilith has also come to a place where she shows up in art and she shows up in our current contemporary context. So remember this pictures of Adam and Eve. Notice that the serpent now has a female face on it. That's Lilith. So who is Lilith? Did anybody ever watch Frasier? Remember his wife's name?
Lilith,
Lilith. Yeah. And what was she?
not a nice person.
That's right. She's like a succubus, let's say. So, what do you know of Lilith? You may know something. You may have heard the name, obviously, from Frasier's wife.
But, well, no.
That's okay.
Well, I just remember some scraps of hearing about her here and there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, she is first mentioned in the alphabet of Ben Sira around the 800 to 900 CE, and it is a Jewish text that is working on more midrashic ideas. Then in the Talmud, we have Lilith mentioned. It shows no connection to Adam, and there are 4 specific references to Lilith in the Babylonian Talmud, which is this collection of Jewish teachings. And we learn that she is, quote, a wild-haired and winged creature with nymphomaniac tendencies and mother of demons. There you go. That is Lilith. So maybe now we know why Lilith showed up in Fraser Crane's life. The only time
but she was a hard-nosed person. She was smart.
She was smart, she was successful, and she was demeaned for that and made fun of by other people in the show. In Isaiah 34, verse 14, there is this word Lilith that is usually translated as either an owl or a night monster. That's not a person. It's not a woman. It's contextual. It's telling us they're out in the wilderness where this Lilith will be. And it comes, we think, from a Akkadian word that means female spirit, wind. And probably that's what Lilith means from that root tradition. A female spirit wind. Here's another picture. Here, the serpent has completely taken on a Lilith personality. Not just the snake, but now Lilith is in the picture. So how did we get from this one word that doesn't even talk about a woman in Isaiah to all this stuff of a wild-haired maniac who's a nymphomaniac, etc.? Well, one way that Lilith became part of the Jewish tradition was that because we have Genesis 1, a story, and then Genesis 2, 4b, a story that's different from the first creation stories, the rabbis were trying to figure out, if God made the man and the woman in Genesis 1, why did God make man and woman again in Genesis 2? And so they talk about the first Eve in Genesis 1, who they say returned to dust. And then in the second creation, there is a second Eve. So in the Talmud, Lilith is that first Eve. And she was, as Adam's equal. Remember at the end of the Genesis 1, male and female in God's image, which I'm going to preach on later in a different angle. And she refused to do what Adam wanted her to do. There are lots of stories about what he wanted her to do, but I won't cover them in Sunday school. And so she fled to another part of the garden. And Adam complains to God, like, why did you create this person equal to me who won't do my bidding? And that's what prompts God to create Eve, who is more supposedly compliant and passive. And so when they were kicked out of the garden, Adam blames Eve for that, and in one part of the Talmud, he goes back to Lilith. And she bore him children who became demons. And so Adam goes back to Eve. He really can't make up his mind and reconciles with her. And Lilith becomes queen of the demons, the consort of Samael, which was also a demon. So poor Lilith gets stuck into the story always in a negative light by the rabbis. But here's a more contemporary artist. This is Lilith on your right, and this is Eve on the left. See, Eve is closed and covered. There is Lilith with her wings, and she's bold and confident. So in another writing by the rabbis, a midrash on Numbers, Lilith becomes a baby killer. And we think that that is how the ancient world described sudden infant death syndrome. They blamed Lilith for killing the infants in their cribs. When boy children get past their circumcision on the 8th day, then she can't come get your child. But Jews developed a custom of what they called watch night to protect the infant from Lilith coming and killing the child. And again, later Christian writers connected her with the evil woman. You know, you've got woman wisdom in Proverbs and woman folly or stranger. Christian writers said that's Lilith. Now this is that same artist. Now you've got Lilith and Eve touching back to back. So what we find here is that Lilith's character is a maze of contradictions. Not from the Bible, but from extra biblical material, interweaving a variety of legends and traditions. Really, the rabbis were using Lilith to explain whatever they didn't like. Sudden infant death syndrome, nocturnal emissions. She was said to steal male seed while they were sleeping to make more demon babies. If we isolate all the strands of demonology, separating the various interpolations, inserting of Lilitu, the wind spirit, Labartu, the child slayer, Lamashtu, the Greek Lamia, Lilith, the night demon, we are left with the story of the first Eve, who may or may not have claim to the name Lilith in the first place. Now notice, this is from a magazine. Unfortunately, it's defunct now, but it was a magazine called Lilith, a Jewish feminist magazine. So what we find, Jewish feminists, Christian feminists, and others are reclaiming Lilith now as a figure of liberation. An independent spirit who won the battle for equal rights, representative of creativity, and the first woman on earth. In fact, there are stories about how she tried to tempt Eve to leave Adam and come with her and be free, but Eve stayed. But you can see why some people put her into those images of Adam and Eve and the serpent, because there she is tempting Eve. That may be, oh, there it is. Anybody recognize this symbol?
That's Lilith.
Yes, and it's from the Lilith Fair, which was a music concert festival with all female artists, and they reclaimed Lilith as their role model.
I don't want her to be my role model.
Well, they're taking out all that demonology stuff and saying, because they really do think, again, the rabbis are trying to explain why they have these things, and they have to blame somebody. They can't take responsibility for their actions. And so Lilith is a great character. She's a succubus. She's that. Anything they can't explain got thrown onto Lilith. But this is the positive image of Lilith as a free spirit, as an independent woman, as a woman who refused to be dominated by a man.
Now, I've seen that image in contrast to the birth of Venus where she's covering herself up,
Yeah.
and it's the same image, and now she's opened herself up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Notice there's no shame, no any of the things that we see so often with Eve. This is another modern artist's depiction of Lilith. So she looks like everybody else, but underneath she is this free spirit. So, comments, questions?
Does Lilith appear in any of the Muslim or Islamic traditions?
I'm not as familiar with that.
Just because of that piece of art that you showed previously.
Yes,
Almost looked
that's
like
one.
she was in hijab.
Yeah, and I think this is an artist who is from, one of those countries. Yeah, and so I need to look and see if the writers on the Quran also pick up on Lilith. And since the Islamic faith also uses New Testament Hebrew Bible, they may have their own commentary on it.
So my understanding, and this needs to be checked, is that there's only one woman mentioned in the Quran, and that's Mary. Not so. Anyway, not
And
even
not
Hagar.
Hagar?
Not even Hagar.
That's right, I think I'm remembering
So
that.
that's striking. Mary has a lot of ink, but she's the only woman.
How did we climb out of, how did women climb out of this? I mean, have we? The other night, the other night.
You use the past tense.
Well, the other night, we were watching, a friend of mine and some friends of mine and I were watching Taming of the Shrew with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. And we got down to we were enjoying it very much, and we got down to the end where she says that women should, she goes the party line, you know, Shakespeare has her other bit. If you want, put your hand beneath your husband's foot and show that he is your Lord, your provider, that you, and we were all saying, I don't think so. Yeah. And then, this is Shakespeare, this is not, you know, thousands and thousands of years ago.
Well, heads up, in 2026, the Atlantic had an article this week that Pete Hegseth as a minister, and he's got 170 congregations around it. It's
Yes.
a virtual thing, yes. And they are pushing to take away the amendment that gives women the right to vote.
Right, yes.
And that's becoming a movement. So we may have something else to fight, guys.
Well,
Gals.
women have made great strides just in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Because I can remember as a kid hearing my mother, she was the first in her family to get a divorce. And they kind of blackballed her, you know, and saw how she was treated and how she came out of it. And then, like I say, in my lifetime, I've seen great strides for women, but not, I don't think enough.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we still, you know, fine, but my parents got divorced for a little while when I was, but my mother was pregnant with me when they decided, but they did not get divorced until after I was born, so that on my birth certificate it says that my parents were married. She did not want that on my birth certificate. They
How did the
remarried later.
rabbis,
Go ahead.
how did the rabbis, how did these stories, who were the writers of the stories, like the original writers?
Of the Talmud or of Genesis?
Well, how do they relate to their beginnings?
Yeah. So we don't know who wrote Genesis. We think it was a collection of traditions from different areas that kind of got interwoven into the story that we know now as Genesis. That's one of the reasons why in one place it says Noah took animals 2 by 2, and the other place it says 7 pairs of clean. And so we have no idea. The idea that many hold is that probably in exile or just after, the stories were being brought together to form a document, or at that point scrolls, that would be unifying for the Jews who were coming back from exile, the Jewish people who had stayed in the area. And so these stories, some of them are as ancient as humanity, and others probably are a little more recent as in like maybe 6th century BCE. But the rabbis we know were starting around I think the Talmud I said was 600, something like that, BCE. The rabbis, of course, at that point, we believe, had decided only women could be rabbis, or only men could be rabbis. And so that's part of why we get this very male-dominant reading of the text.
And only one tribe of the 12 tribes could be rabbis.
Well, no,
Right.
that was priests.
Okay.
Especially once the temple was destroyed, they didn't do sacrifices. The priests were no longer kind of the religious leaders. Rabbis showed up in synagogues. They were teachers, different ways of understanding how they connected to the divine. But once there was no temple and no altar, they didn't do the sacrifices, which was one of the main roles of the priests. What I do find surprising, though, is as Christians, and particularly Christian feminists, we make ourselves look good by portraying Jesus as better than the Jewish culture of his time. But that's not accurate. Much of what Jesus taught was right from the Hebrew Bible, and other Jewish teachers, rabbis, were teaching similar things. But one of the best examples I like to point to is, when Jesus asked if, a man and woman divorce and then remarry, whose wife is she in heaven and all that, and you get this sense you shouldn't divorce. There's no divorce. And everybody thinks, oh, that's really great for women. Was it really? If you were in abusive relationships, do you want them not to be able to divorce? And what the rabbis and the other Jewish leaders had done was they had created an avenue for women to request a divorce because of lots of reasons. Whereas prior to that, men only could divorce. Women had no right to request a divorce. So while we tend to think, oh, Jesus was caring about the women, in many ways, the Jewish culture had already started moving towards women's ability to divorce for their own reasons. And that to me is, not that Jesus wasn't great. Remember, I follow Jesus. But Jesus wasn't a feminist, no matter what people tell you. And some of the Christian feminists who write that way, that's really anti-Semitic and supersessionist, that somehow the only way we can make ourselves look good is if we make Judaism look bad. And there's a lot of that in early feminist writings, and then Jewish feminists joined the conversation and pointed that out. And I think the groups are working better, just like womanist scholars came in and helped white feminists who were only focusing on sexuality, gender, and started asking about questions of intersectionality. But I just like to point that out because your story about your mother and the divorce and all that, it was better until we became more Christianized nations, etc. And then the patriarchy started to develop in ways that may not have been there in the very beginning. I tell folks my mom was your typical 1950s housewife. My dad worked, she stayed home, raised the children, did those things. When my dad got Alzheimer's, my mother had never written a check in her life, because that's not what the wife did. The man did all the finances. We know that it wasn't that long ago a woman could not get a credit card on her own. So as much as I'd like to think we've come a long way, baby, we haven't come that far that fast, that quickly, and as you just mentioned, it's really not a given anymore that we're gonna maintain a woman's right to anything, much unless it is to be pregnant and bear children. As who was the dude who said, talked about cat women, was that Vance? Yeah, it was Vance.
Oh,
Which I wanted to send him a copy of my book about child-free women in the Bible and take a look-see. Your hand was up, were you?
There's a couple of things. One of which is completely personal. The bottom of one of your screens, you have Lilith. I read it as Lilith, consort of Samuel, and apparently that's not what it says, but that's what I read anyway.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could change that to the demons.
Samael.
Yeah, one letter is different in the name. But
Yeah.
but I read that as the name of my son. But way back in history, you had Abraham as a subordinate to his wife.
In many ways, yes.
And you have Ulysses having a wife who ran a household for decades, according to the folk, whatever that story is. And it seems that there isn't a clear history of women being subordinate and wives being subordinate. That it gets untrustworthy
Yes.
about what was really going on. And,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I noticed a weird genealogy thing where for some reason genealogy became male, but people pointed out that according to biblical genealogies, both David and Goliath had a ancestral mother, and which took me a long time to believe that. but there seems to be a decision not to go with female genealogy.
Yeah. Actually, I do have Samael in that slide. Did you think I had Samuel?
Yeah, it finally dawned on me I had to have been misreading it.
Okay, yeah.
And that has to do with me having a son named Samuel.
Yeah, yes.
But I genuinely was misreading it for quite a while.
Yeah, I mean, even up to this day, the most Orthodox Jewish people trace your lineage through your mother. You're not Jewish if you don't have a Jewish mother.
Yeah. You know who your mother is.
Exactly. And that's why that custom developed all the way back to these ancient times. You couldn't guarantee who the father was because there's no DNA test. The only guaranteed parent was the mother. And that's why it was so important that the mother be of the right lineage, even more so than the father. But again, the male storytellers and the the male-dominated culture still traced lineage by the father's name. So even though they couldn't guarantee the father, and that's why they put all those perimeters around women's sexuality. Like men could go to
How's it feel reviewed?
Yes, a prostitute, and not even if he's married, that's not adultery. But a woman who's married or betrothed
Gets
couldn't
stoned.
sleep with another person who was not her husband or betrothed. So, yeah. I have my theories as to why that changed. One of the theories I think works in the ancient Israelite context is that when there was a move from an agriculturally based community to a center capital or central city, women, because of childbirth, because of taking care of children, couldn't go to the city gate because they were doing other things. And the only people who could go to the city gate where the decisions were made were men. And that's how we moved into this more men are making decisions because of biological aspects of females. They weren't free to go to the city gate and have a voice. But then we have stories like Deborah, who was a judge, and we have stories like Miriam, who's a prophet. So I like to believe, and I may have told you all this in the past, but in my brain, the committee that came up with the canon of the Hebrew Bible, which there was never a committee, never, for the Jewish tradition, had all males but one woman. And whenever they get stuck, she would say, well, maybe we could add in this woman's story. So, for example, if the tradition were followed that some do, that when Abraham took Isaac up to sacrifice him, he actually did kill him because it says only Abraham came down from the mountain. I imagine people are like, oh no, how are we going to get from Isaac to Jacob and Esau? What are we going to do? And that woman committee member said, well, there is this tradition about Rebecca. And maybe we can stick her into the story to bridge the gap from Abraham and Sarah to Jacob, Rachel, and Leah, and Bilhah and Zilpah. So that's my fantasy. I have no evidence of that whatsoever. But and so the more that power was moved out of the household into central places, the less authority women had. And it still, I think, works out in our most recent past, too. Yeah.
My mother was a country girl, got married, and my dad decided World War II had broke out. They would go to Portland and work on ships. He was a welder. They got there, they needed more welders, so they trained my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother said that World War II was the turning point for women, that she would have never been anything but a housewife if it hadn't have been that welding job that put her out and gave her some confidence, and I guess it did that for a lot of American women.
Yeah, Rosie the Riveter.
That was my mother.
Yeah, the sad thing is, though, some of what I've read is that when men got back from the war, they wanted their jobs back. So women got sent back to the house.
Not very quickly.
I think we're out of time. I'm
That's
sorry
right.
I've gone over.
No, this is great. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Would you close us in prayer,
Yeah.
Professor
Yes.
Davison?
Yeah.
Please join me in prayer. Holy One, you gave us curiosity to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, and hopefully to work for change. May we go forth renewed in our commitment to work for justice for all your children and all of your creation. Amen.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Sure,
Thank
my
you, that was
pleasure.
great.